I had, running in the Houston heat, there were a couple of instances where I passed out because I
Mhm.
was pushing myself way too hard. And I also, I was still trying to figure out what my body needed in those extreme situations. I haven't been running marathons that long. And so I was still trying to figure it out. In some ways, I still am. And I had one instance where I passed out when I was on a run. I didn't feel great. I finished my long run, and I thought I just need to get home and eat, and I passed out driving home, and that was kind of a wake up call. And I really had to stop. And this was in August, and my event was in January. So I had some concerns about making a change, but I just felt like it was the right thing to do at that time. I just felt like I needed a new direction.
Well, okay. Well, I get it's probably a good timing to to bring in Will here. Will, and I think it's really important to for the listeners to highlight. Will is a senior purple patch coach. Will, it's the first time on the show. You haven't been on the show yet.
Right.
But you and I do a lot of work with each other. Go and do a lot of leadership workshops and things along those lines. But for listeners, Will has, amongst all of the purple patch coaches, by far the most experience in these types of crazy things. I mean, Will, you've done back to back to back to back to back to back to back Ironman races continue. You've done a lot of ultra endurance racing, so you come with the pedigree to help. I'm really interested when you took Scott on, and and what were your first impressions? You sort of heard this story. What as an athlete,
Yeah.
what was sort of your instinct?
Well, first off, I was very excited because, that's kind of my wheelhouse. And I was excited because I love people that go after big, hairy, audacious goals. And Scott was doing that. And I knew that was going to be a very transformative experience. So as a coach, it's very rewarding. I also knew that I did have the experience to kind of help and shepherd him through the process. So I was excited about being able to do that. I was very concerned, however, as a coach. I kind of got the background that he had passed out while driving, and found out that he was running basically 6 days a week and running large volumes. And I was concerned that he was in this. I wasn't happy that he had the incident that he had that kind of flipped the switch for him,
Yeah,
but I knew it was probably beneficial for my relationship because he was ready for a change because what he was doing was no longer working for him. My concern was he ready to really make a a big shift in the way that we would approach the rest of his training in a way that would make him feel comfortable and confident with how we were moving forward, because we basically cut his running volume down from 6 days a week, averaging a lot in the in August and even prior in July. Looking back at his training peaks plan that he had with his prior coach, he was running some big mileage, as he said earlier, but often he was running about 70 miles a week, double digits most days. And I was cutting him down to about 3 to 4 runs a week, wanting to get that running mileage down to about half of what it was, at least, and also wanting to introduce some cross training, introduce some strength training, introduce a real focus on nutrition. And he was starting to dial that in with his nutritionist, but really wanting to dial in all those aspects that were going to help support him on this journey for the next 6 months. And probably the biggest little concern I had when we initially talked was when I was talking to him about doing cross training. He was a little resistant, right, Scott? And
The bike.
I was like, we can bike, we can swim, we can, row, we can find another, outlet for cardio. And he's like, I don't have a bike, I don't swim, I don't row. I'm like, okay, we've got to figure this out. And he had a stationary bike that he could use. And so, I mean, that's how we started leveraging 2 cross training days a week. And I added also a rest and recovery day in there to make sure that he was just having a full day of recovery throughout the rest of his very busy week.
So it echoes and parallels very much the sort of purple patch approach of marathon running. I mean, we've talked a lot on the show about getting athletes to go very, very fast relative to their prior performances by leveraging multi-sport and, of course, strength and conditioning. But I can't help but come back to you, Scott. That's got to be a little bit of a mind twist. You know, it certainly took, and I'll say it right now, well done on being really, really brave on this. But you must have had a little bit of fear of like, welcome to your new coach. We're going to half your volume. Like that must have been at the start. Like, whoa, hang on, I want change, but I'm not ready for change. Change is hard. Yeah, change is really, really hard.
It is, and I had some concerns, doing it that close to the actual event because
Yeah,
I knew, I think Will and I talked for the first time in August. I think it was late August. And
Yeah.
then I figured there was going to be at least a 30-day get to know you period. And then, we were getting even closer to the event. So it was a little scary, but, once I got connected with Will and I talked to him, I really liked him. And yes, the change was a little scary. But he got me on the bike, and I've got a rower, and so we changed things up a bit, and it was, my legs felt much better, and I actually felt stronger.
so I'd love, yeah, I got to ask that. Like, what was the after once you got that ball rolling, proverbially, and it was like Will came in, bam. You know, we're changing it all up right now. Like, none of this. We're not going to go down this journey. You went with it, which, by the way, is not easy. I want to double underline for anyone. It's not easy. Change is not easy, even if it's positive change. And the fact you did that, that shows actually a lot of athletic IQ or a lot of coachability. I think that's a thing that we should highlight here. But once you got that, 4, 6 weeks in, what was the impact of that? You know, you've dropped down your volume, you've increased your other modalities in there, brought in multi-sport. Did you feel fitter, stronger, more in control, greater performance predictability? What was the sort of and finally confidence before you went into the event?
Yeah, my body felt better, my mind felt better, my legs felt stronger. Will, he put me on the bike for some pretty grueling workouts, and I hated every minute of it, and he heard about it, but I really started seeing my strength and everything improve. And so, I when I decided to go with Will, figured if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be all in. And he's so even keeled, and he's obviously got the resume. And so, you know, I just trusted him, and it worked out. And not running as much was really hard because I was used to going out day after day and grinding. And credit to my previous coach that although I was doing so much volume, I had a really great running base
Mhm.
for to work with, and that really carried me through the rest of the
Yeah.
year. So yeah, but yeah, Will really came in and changed things up, and I think it made things better. I know it did.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that you would often tell me is that you just felt less fatigued,
Right.
which, you're coming in fresher to your workouts, so you're fit and fresh, as we
Right.
like to say at Purple Patch, which was a great thing, and even though there was resistance with the biking, you complained about it, you also, as I would kind of press him on, it's like, "Hey, I know it's working, so I'm doing it,
Right.
but I need every minute of it," type of thing.
Mhm.
It's often the way.
He's like, his first thing was, "How can anybody stay on the bike for an hour? That seems awful." And I'm like,
Yeah.
Share you. Well, let's go through the experience because I'm sure listeners are desperate to hear this thing because, running a single marathon, tough. 7 days in a row, different continents and everyone, sleep deprivation, time shifts, it's a whole nother level. Here's my first one. Of the 7, which one was the toughest and why? There must have been 1 or 2 that were just harder.
I I mean, I think the worst one was probably what was Fortaleza, Brazil. We had just run in Madrid, 12 or 14 hours before, and we flew all night. We got to Brazil early that morning. We were running by 6 a.m. and um, and because we had turbulence on the plane, they weren't able to feed us before the run. And I was, so I was in a calorie deficit. I hadn't had a chance to really rehydrate. I didn't sleep. And so we get there and we start running. And because we're right on the equator, that sun came up fast. And
Okay.
before we knew it, it was, 92, 93 degrees and really high humidity and no shade. And I got into the run and I had some spasms in my legs and said, okay, I just need to dial it back. So I dialed it way back because at that point it was just finish. Um, so that one was especially difficult. And then really the first two marathons, Antarctica and Cape Town, were difficult because I was running a fever and had
Mm.
nausea, and so it just wasn't, it was tough.